I thought we'd start with a session based around the concept of equanimity, and I often like to weave this into class. It's obviously something you can work with within the body, but also the mind, and I think it's a beautiful idea. It's really what we're looking for through our yoga practice. So let's come onto our backs in a semi-supine position. Allow for your spine to settle, and within this idea of equanimity, we're really thinking about the relationship between the pelvis and the spine, which is quite a complex relationship. So just coming into semi-supine, make sure there's enough space so you can stretch your legs out. I often end up kicking things over at this point. So make sure there's enough space for you to come into semi-supine firstly and begin to compile a weather report on how you're feeling today. I'm just going to let one more person in. Compiling a weather report, noticing how you are this evening and acknowledging anything that comes up, anything of residue from your day as we're coming to the end of the day. And just feeling into the breath and the nasal breathing first of all. So whether you're a nasal breather throughout the day or a mouth breather, we all have different tendencies. It is said, hi Ella, it is said that it's much better for you to breathe through the nose. So begin to cultivate that sense of the breath through the nose. Just noticing whether they're quite closed or open and how that is for you. Hang on, I'm just going to mute you, Julia. Breathing through the nostrils. Feel free to unmute yourselves if you need to speak to me. And allowing for the spine to settle. Now you may be able to bring your attention to the back of the pelvis. So the pelvis is this amazing architectural joint, this huge bone within the body, and it contains so much of our organs and our way of being within this pelvic bowl. It's a really interesting structure. Think about the back of the pelvis and how that rests against the mat. And you may be able to feel the tailbone, the sacrum, depending on how bony that structure is. Can you feel that as it rests down with a certain amount of weight? And perhaps bring that attention up to the lumbar, the lower back, and notice how that is positioned. And we can begin to rock backwards and forwards. You may be familiar with this movement, the pelvic tilt, allowing for this movement as we roll along the back of the pelvis and roll the pelvis forwards. A very gentle and subtle movement. And for some of us, if we're not used to this, it can be very difficult to isolate this movement. So none of you are beginners, but I have noticed with beginners' bodies that it's very tricky for this subtle movement to kind of be touched into. Creating some space for that pelvis to roll without coming into a very huge gross motor action. Rolling backwards and forwards. And I like to use that lovely visualization of the bowl of water, the mixing bowl, as we sloosh the water up towards the face. We sloosh the water down towards the feet. And you get this lovely action. Now, just pay attention to whether any movement is moving up through the spine. Perhaps your chin is nodding slightly. As you roll towards the feet, maybe the chin draws in. As you roll and flatten the lumbar, maybe the chin draws up towards the ceiling more. Or maybe it doesn't. Just notice what is occurring within your own body. Now, with that mindfulness of the space below the legs here, we're going to let go of this pelvic roll and straighten out one leg at a time. So I want you to notice what takes place when you lengthen out one leg within the pelvis. Is there a slight roll to the side? Is there any pulling taking place? Or maybe the leg just flattens out quite happily. And then bend that knee and come to the other side. So how much can you release into this lengthening of the leg? Now, sometimes if we're very tight within the hips, if we've been doing lots of squats, we've done a lot of repetitive action around the pelvic area. What happens when we straighten a leg is that it can pull into the lumbar and create quite a lot of busyness, as I like to call it, within the lower back. Just notice if that's the case for you as you bend the knee again. And we're going to straighten out both legs as though you're coming into Shavasana. And what happens here? Does anything occur within the lumbar? Can you allow for the legs to roll out? Will the iliopsoas muscle release and lengthen? Or are we holding tightly onto something? Perhaps you can notice that, perhaps you can't. Just notice what comes up for you as you lengthen the legs, whether there's any pulling, and bend the legs again. So we're looking for a sense of equanimity, as I said before, within our practice, a sense of equality, a sense of softness, rather than striving. So sometimes we can come into a movement that pulls like scoliosis, which is to do with the quadratus lumborum, the QL, to the side of the hip. Now it's really interesting because that tightness, and that's almost an emotional tension, that tightness can create some scoliosis up the spine. It's something that I actually do have from wearing very heavy bags on one shoulder as a teenager, which creates this lopsidedness. So it's interesting to work with those elements. Now bring your feet back in line, so they're hip width apart, and we're going to begin to roll that pelvic tilt up into Dvipadapitham. The arms can come alongside the body, moving up into the spine, feeling into the lumbar, the thoracic, the clavicular spine, coming up as high as you like or as low as you like, creating a sense of fluidity within this movement, rolling, maybe allowing for that head to tilt and coming back up again. Now let's bring the arms into this action. So as you lift the pelvis, the arms can come up and overhead. And if the arms are happy to move overhead, great, but otherwise just hold them where they need to stop and roll, bending the elbows with that sense of softness as you draw yourself in. Making contact with that abdominal region and maybe the pelvic diaphragm. This time as we lift the arms up overhead, noticing what occurs within the pelvic diaphragm. Maybe there's a sense of drawing upwards, a muller band, the pelvic floor, and then rolling all the way back down again, allowing for a little roll onto the back of the tailbone and that sense of relaxation and flattening of the pelvic floor. Just notice if that's available to notice. And if it's not tangible, you can almost lift the pelvic floor, lift the pelvic diaphragm. Think of it like a hammock. This lovely structure internally, and God knows why we decided to call it the pelvic floor, because it's nothing like a floor. Rolling back down again, exhaling or inhaling all the way up and softly drawing yourself back through into your semi-supine. This time we're going to lift the arms up overhead, stretching and reaching up towards the ceiling, almost drawing the arms out of the arm sockets and allowing them to sink back down into the shoulder socket here. We're now going to roll up through the spine and notice whether that's changed anything as you move up into that clavicular area in between the shoulder blades and roll back down. Keeping the gaze up through the midline here. I'm looking to the side, which makes me fairly lopsided, but so I can look at you guys. And roll back down. Now, as we roll back up again, I'd like you to explore what it would feel like to lift up one leg. No need to straighten the leg at all. What occurs? You may notice some stability coming in here, some stabilizing, which means the leg is working more than it was before. But can you keep the pelvis stable? What occurs in your body? Is there a response here? And you can explore straightening the leg out. Ensure that you feel comfortable around the back of the lumbar. Can you make this feel as effortless as possible? Spreading through the toes here and then rolling back down into your semi-supine, but drawing the knees in to come into flexion, into a tiny ball, a cosmic ball, rolling from side to side, giving yourself a little bit of a massage, really important after what could potentially move into the lumbar there. We're going to drop the right leg down, come into an external rotation, allow for the knee to draw aside. Spreading the toes wide, dorsiflexion to protect the knee, of course. Hands come to hip points. And let's see how it feels to bring the knees in towards the center. You may be able to grasp behind the knee, rocking from side to side, feeling into the hips. How does this feel today? It's actually feeling quite strong within my hip today. Just notice that. If there's any sense of popping, if you're a bit hyper flexible within the hips, feel contained. Don't push into any edges too strongly. Feeling into this movement, we're going to allow for the knees to roll over to the other side of the body. Bring the arms out into a T shape, come into Jatara Parivriti. Our supine rotation, gazing over to the opposing side if the neck feels happy to do so. Breathing and keeping the shoulder blades down. How does this feel? Come into this lovely rotation here. You may not want to come out of it. Let's draw the gaze up through the midline. Roll the legs in and drop the feet down. Coming to the other side, hands to hip points, dorsiflexion of the foot to protect the knee. Drawing the legs in towards the midline, spreading out through the toes, rolling from side to side. How does this hip feel today? Are you salivating? Have you moved into the parasympathetic nervous system, that state of rest and digest? Or are you holding on to any tension? Maybe you're not salivating. Just notice that. And then let's drop the legs over with bringing the arms out into a T shape to come into your Jatara Parivriti, keeping the shoulder blades grounded. The gaze comes to follow through to the other hand. Breathing into the belly, allowing for the rib cage to open. Resting into this space, releasing here. Bringing the gaze up through center, rolling the knees in towards the midline. And let's draw the knees in towards the center, lifting up the gaze, rocking and rolling along the spine. Give yourself 3 opportunities to roll here. But we're not going to come forwards into all fours, as you may expect. We're going to come back into what I call a woodlouse pose. So you're finding your shins parallel and the knees are above the hip points, spreading the feet wide and the arms come up towards the ceiling. Now, this in itself takes a certain amount of containment and effort around the abdominal region. You can widen the legs or widen the arms to position yourself. We're going to roll from side to side. I'm liking the shaking. I can see that. That's fantastic. If you want to shake it out, shake it out. You could be a woodlouse that's vibrating. We're going to roll from side to side and just see what needs to take place in order for you not to collapse. So you can widen the base of support, thereby opening the limbs. There's no need for the limbs to be tightly held. They can expand and open, rolling from side to side. Make this perhaps more challenging for yourself by bringing the knees away from the midline. Lovely. Coming up through the center, let's extend the fingers and the toes towards the face and point 3 times, coming into Pavanmuktasana, joint releasing, and then spiraling to the wrists and the ankles, which can be often very neglected, and then coming back in the opposite direction. See if you can fathom that today. And then we're going to come in opposite directions now. So get the right hand side spiraling outwards. See if you can do this. And the other side spiraling inwards. Can you do that? Can you get them spiraling in opposing directions? And maybe play with a cross action. So you've got the left foot spiraling and the right hand spiraling. And you keep the other 2 still. And then come to the other side. You've got the right foot spiraling and the left wrist spiraling. And you can play with combinations of this to see if you can do opposing spirals, which might be a bit much for me today. Lovely. And then roll along the spine here to come up through into your all fours, your tabletop. A simple space to come into, but just notice the tendency, again, thinking about the relationship between the pelvis and the spine. Where is your tendency within tabletop? Are you someone who collapses? Perhaps you look a bit like this and you simply sort of slump into the position. Or are you someone who puts a lot of effort into this and braces and pushes against the floor? Almost lack of trust there. Or can you come into a space of yielding, somewhere in between, where you consider a support system through the hands, where you press through the fingers, creating that lovely arch underneath the palm. And that support moves up through the wrists, all the way up through the arm. And you can tell when you let go of that pressing down through the fingers, how your energy dumps into the wrists. And that's where we end up feeling quite weak within our yoga practice. So let's cultivate that sense of pushing through the fingers. I can't say it enough. And while we're here, let's spiral the fingers out to the outer reaches to work into those RSI wrists from our smartphones, our laptops, and then spiral the fingers in towards the knees, knowing that you can adjust the angle of the wrists so we're not trying to break them in any way. Feeling into that space and spiraling the fingers into the inner line. Perhaps a less sensory experience, this position. And then we're going to flip the hands upside down, spreading through the thumb and the little finger, opening up the hands. And just noticing what comes up there, if it feels tender, maybe it feels a little bit excruciating, maybe it feels really wonderful. And then flip the hands back down. So you want the hands directly under the shoulders, and we're going to undulate in and out of our cat-cow, dropping the crown of the head down towards the mat, coming into that lovely flexion, and then draw yourself in to come into extension, remembering that we want the extension to come through the heart space, the thoracic, gazing down at the mat so the neck is long. Coming into a breath-led cat-cow here. And if you want to follow a specific pattern, I would recommend exhaling on the more extreme flexion extension movement, inhaling through the neutral, exhaling. This is to create more space when the diaphragm moves up into the cavity. Coming into that lovely extension, feeling that movement from the pelvis up through the spine, and allowing for the head to rest on the atlas joint without any of the crunching that you often see in a cat-cow position when students leave with the chin. It's really about this long line, this long curve here. And let's come back through our neutral. Adjust the fingers as you may begin to start dumping weight through the wrists. We're going to come into a lateral movement. So you're drawing a line and shortening that line between the left ear and the left hip point. What does that involve? My Peter Blackaby inspired somatic movements here, a lateral extension. So we're closing down the side seam of the body to try and draw the left ear towards the left hip point, and then coming over to the right hip point. Now this is where we begin to maybe touch into what feels more familiar. Does one side feel more familiar than the other side? Can you notice anything at all? Does something take over here? And notice if you're dumping into the lumbar, draw that tailbone down towards the floor. So this action begins to touch into that potential tightness from the quadratus lumborium that creates slight scoliosis. Now this is also the movement that we evolved as fish to come out of the sea as we learned we grew little limbs to crawl out. This lateral extension movement came before the flexion and the extension movement that we consider as so crucial to our being. So it's interesting to consider how that relates to the structure of our minds. From this point, we're coming in through the midline. I'm going to come into the bird dog action where we lift the right hand and the left knee off the ground, extending through, spreading through the base of the big toe and the middle finger, breathing here, making any adjustments that you need to protect your lumbar. And bring the limbs in, reach out towards that lovely long line again through from the middle finger to the base of the big toe. Holding that here and drawing the limbs in. Now this time as we come over to one side, I invite you to exhale, drawing knee and elbow together. Inhale to lengthen. Exhale to draw everything in like a little flexion ball. And release. Exhaling and inhaling. 5 or so of these on this side. Don't rush it. And come to the other side, extending that lovely long length, waking up the middle finger, base of the big toe. Exhale, drawing elbow, knee together. Inhale. Through the nostrils, exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Dropping the limbs down. Make any adjustments that you need to. Again, notice if you've dumped into the wrists. This time, as we extend out through the right arm and the left leg, we're coming to the outer reaches of our body. Slightly different action here, coming from the inside to the outside. External rotation within the hips. Gazing down in between the hands, utilizing the breath here. 5 on one side or thereabouts. You can come into child's pose at any point. And draw the limbs in, coming to the other side. Out to the outer reaches, like a salamander or a lizard. What kind of animal are we embodying today? Reaching. Opening the mouth on the exhalation if you wish. Lovely. Bring the limbs back in. Widen the knees, come back into Balasana, wide leg. Child's pose. Extending down through that middle finger all the way up under the armpits along the serratus anterior. Maybe the forehead comes down to the ground. Maybe you've sunk the cheek down to one side. If you have, just bring that cheek over to the other side, sinking down here. We're going to bring ourselves up and come down onto our fronts in prone. So it's your choice tonight. You might want to explore coming down through this way, allowing for the pelvis to sink down. Or if you want to come through something more rigid, you can come up into your tabletop, through your plank, and chaturanga down, bending the elbows. We'll all end up at the same place in crocodile, flattening the feet along the floor, creating a little cushion for the arms, bringing the cheek to rest, wiggle out those hips, remind the body to relax. Bring the gaze to the other side, rest into the cheek, wiggle the hips, reminding the body to relax. We're going to pop our hands underneath the shoulders here and come into cobra with the gaze down at the mat, thinking about the strength at the back of the body. Now the front of the pelvis is pressing down towards the ground. Now you can take this into a stronger Bhujangasana, where we do press a little through the arms. What takes place in your body here? Do you begin to crunch? How does this feel? Are we able to open up around the heart space and then float back down and through, wiggling the hips to release anything that might have occurred within the lumbar? Option to come into that again, lifting up through, utilizing the back body, exploring how this might be in your lumbar, in your thoracic. Cultivate that sense of openness around the front of the heart space, relaxing the shoulders down and away. And drop yourself down, wiggling the hips. Now, if you did feel that within the lumbar here, you can press back into your child's pose, simply like this, to come into a tiny little ball, to come into a flexion. So whenever we get too busy in the lumbar, and that does happen to many of us, this is probably the most nourishing thing you can do. And you can do this with anyone who's complaining with lower back pain should come into this child's pose with the arms alongside the shins. And we're going to draw ourselves back down and through to come into Sphinx. So it's a more supported version of our spinal extension. The forearms come down in a parallel action, spreading through the fingers, because you can just flop the hands down, but you don't get the same support, the yield that's required when you imagine that your fingers are like the fingers of a lizard. If they have fingers, they're probably not called fingers. Spreading through fingers, so you've got these lovely parallel forearms, and you're lifting up through the arms, the heart space opens. Now, can you draw your body in this kind of jelly-like movement? Can you wobble your body through the arms, like you're in an earthquake and the arms are the structure of the building, preferably maybe made out of steel, but the body itself can take the movement. It is flexible and relaxed enough for that to take place. Lovely. Pressing down through the arms here. And we're going to take the arms, bring them under the shoulders, lift ourselves back into our child pose, breathing into the back body. Feel the compression of the knees coming up into the front of the chest. And we're going to just sink ourselves forwards, making our way into upward facing dog. But gradually we allow for the hips to open. So this is more than anything about the iliac psoas. This action can't take place unless it lengthens. And it's very much about flexibility of the thoracic in order not to dump into the lumbar spine. Opening up around the shoulders, drawing the shoulder blades together, gazing down at the mat, rocking yourself back, coming into your child's pose. We're going to tuck the toes underneath the buttocks here and come into broken toe Vajrasana. So find your pelvis in this equal space. The toes are tucked under. If you need to use the hands to bring the little toes out, that can be really useful. Coming into a stable place, thinking about the pelvis again like a bowl of water. Can you think about moving the pelvis like a pelvic tilt? You might not be able to see this here. And tilting the pelvis backwards and forwards. Is there enough space? How does that feel on the feet here? Exhaling to ride that wave of slight discomfort coming up through the feet. Now, if that wave of discomfort is extreme and excruciating, bring your hands down. Take the weight off the feet. The feet over time will change the shape when you work with them in this way. If you work with barefoot walking or anything like that, the feet change their shape over time. Exhaling through the nostrils. Maybe bringing the pelvis into a little bit of a circle here. Can you circle the pelvis in your broken toe Vajrasana? And be kind to yourselves. If you need to bring the hands down, we can't move into a state of equanimity if we're pushing into something too strongly. And let's pad the hands forwards, take the weight into the legs, hover the knees off the ground, coming up into downward dog, dangling the crown of the head down towards the mat, lifting up onto the toes and drawing the heels down. Make any adjustments that you need to when you come into your downward dog. If you want to widen the arms and the legs and open up the base of support, please do. And think about spreading the fingers nice and wide. Now I invite you to spread them as wide as you can to a 30-degree angle, dropping the head. Let's widen the legs so they're as far as you can possibly put them on your mat. And then bring them in closer so we come into mongrel dog. Now see what happens if you bend the knees. Can you draw the knees in towards the rib cage? Thinking about the breath here. We're going to exhale, bend the knees, allow for the diaphragm to move up into the rib cage. Inhale and straighten. Exhale. Now, if you're familiar with Uddiyana Bandha, that's the lock around the diaphragm, respiratory diaphragm. We're moving into that. Exhale, opening and locking the abdomen to let all the air out. And if I open up my downward dog, you can see what that looks like to a certain extent, where everything moves up into the abdominal region. So make sure you're in your mongrel dog. We're going to lift up one arm, explore your 3-point contact with the floor, lift up the other arm, explore that side. How does that feel? This time as we lift the arm, we're going to gaze underneath the armpit and follow with the neck. Moving between those points, it's really quite enjoyable. And then the next time you come to this side, maybe you lift up the left arm and reach for the right ankle or shin to come into rotation. Now you can get hold of the shin or the ankle here. It's a spiral, dropping it down, coming to the other side. Exhaling as you come into your rotation. Know that you can come into your child's pose at any point, and you'll only be able to access this really if you come into your mongrel dog, creating that shortened distance between
those two spaces. Now let's come back into our more equal version of downward dog. We're going to scoop the right leg up towards the ceiling into three-legged dog, keeping the pelvis square, then bending the knee and spiraling into scorpion. The gaze comes under the armpit. So you're no longer in a space of equanimity, and then draw the foot forwards in between the framing of the hands. We're going to drop the knee, flatten the foot, and you can create padding with the mats if it's available to you. And that really does make a difference with the knees here. Lifting up through that solid base of support. When we're in our low lunge, again, the iliopsoas is lengthening. You may be in a low lunge like this, and I see this a lot in beginners, but we're looking for a lengthening, a relaxation, so that heavy pelvis can drop. Lifting up through the arms, we come into a slight back spinal extension, but again, be mindful not to dump into the lumbar. Draw the tailbone down, nice and strong in the front leg. Relax the shoulders, maybe with an inner smile, opening up the hands, so you're almost holding a beach ball here. And you may be able to take this into more of a crescent moon shape and explore how that is. Bringing the arms back and through, so you're not in this extreme spinal extension. I'm going to tuck the toes under and lift up into a high lunge. See if you can transition between those points. It may be the case that you need to bring the hands down to come into high lunge and adjust. Play with that notion, drawing the tailbone down towards the ground. Nice and strong in that front knee. You want that knee to be in line so it's not winging into an internal rotation. Lovely. Breathing those hands back and through. We're drawing the right leg into three-legged dog and dropping the foot down. So we come into that equal place. Lifting up through your left leg, three-legged dog. Spiraling into scorpion, you bend the knee and let the foot drop as you gaze under the armpit. Breathing, exploring, spiraling that foot to come in between your frame at the front of the mat. You can fold the mat over here to bend the knee so it sinks down onto the mat, flattening the foot. That lovely base of support, make sure that knee is directly over the ankle, so you feel supported and stable. If you feel like you're on a tightrope, you might need to widen your base of support slightly before lifting the arms up and overhead. Thinking again about the pelvis, about your lumbar. You can draw the pelvis down to protect that region, relaxing the shoulders, maybe coming into a slight spinal extension. So you come into your crescent moon. How does that feel? And then drawing that tailbone down to protect yourself. We're going to tuck the toes under or use the arms to lift into high lunge. How does this feel? Potentially quite strong. If you need to bring that back leg in, feel free to do so. See how that changes things. Breathing and spiraling the hands to the front of the mat. We're going to step forwards into Uttanasana. Forward fold. Bending the knees to allow for the spine to really free itself. You may feel a bit like a chimpanzee here with the arms swaying towards the ground. Maybe you can stroke into imagined sand or mud, spiraling from side to side, moving into the hips here. And we're going to make our way up, and you may want to open up your legs slightly to come into your Tadasana with the head coming up last. So there's a lovely kind of figure of 8 action taking place, a sense of fluidity. Where you're moving from side to side, you're accessing these movements that can take place. They're complex movements as you come up into your Uttanasana, your standing pose. And take your time as you come into standing, noticing how your footprint lies against the mat. Bring them about hip width apart, lifting up the toes. So get that lovely spread. My head's still cut off, apologies. And see if you can bring the toes down on an individual basis. Then lift the heels off the ground. Now, I was listening to something today that said that this action is really great for a bit of a mental reset, which I thought was really interesting because we do this quite naturally in yoga.
to lift up through the feet and bring the toes off the ground. Lovely. I'm going to bring the arms into it to come into pencil Tadasana, lifting up through the arms, stretching nice and tall. So you've got this lovely long line along the side of your body as you lift up onto the toes and then sink down and draw the toes off the ground. Now we're going to take this into Utkatasana. So as we lift up onto our pelvis, onto our toes rather, reaching through the middle finger, we're going to ski Sunday back, lifting the toes off the ground, coming into Utkatasana, protecting our spines. How much can you sink back? And then breathing into your pencil Tadasana. Whatever I do, I cut off elements of my body. Apologies for that. Coming into Utkatasana, reaching through that middle finger, that lovely long line. The tailbone sinks down and lifting up into pencil Tadasana. And then coming through into Utkatasana. Now you may want to widen the stance of your legs if that is preferable. Lifting up into your pencil Tadasana and lifting the toes up off the ground. Maybe exploring how it feels to bring the hands into Anjali Mudra. If the arms feel tight, bring them through here. Lifting up and sinking down. In your own time, with your own breath, working through these spaces. And as we lift up through our pencil Tadasana, we're going to think about coming back down through Anjali Mudra, but bringing the feet together so they're closer in. So from this position, we're going to bring the feet in. So we're going to come into a rotation here. I want you to be really mindful of the hips. We're going to sink down into Utkatasana and spiral with the hips staying where they are to one side. You may be able to bring your left arm to the side of the right knee. Spiraling through, breathing here. Notice what the knees do. The knees will want to move. And then coming through the midline. You can stand up again before coming to the other side. Notice how this side feels. This side may be more accessible or less accessible. Just notice. Spiraling through the spine and then coming through the midline. And let's lift up into pencil Tadasana to come back. This time come back through the opposite side. So the side that we just came to. Keep those knees together. Exhaling. So come into rotation. And to the other side. Exhaling to come into rotation. Pretty strong. And then lift up and through. Bring those arms down and give yourself a chance to let that energy percolate through the body. We're going to open the legs wide now to come into Prasarita Padottanasana. Take that stance as wide as you like. And then with the pelvis situated so the tailbone is drawing downwards, the pelvic diaphragm's lifting up. Can you feel that? We're going to tilt ourselves forwards with the hands at the hip points to come into Prasarita Padottanasana. Now in this action, the feet are parallel, but there's sort of an accent of pressure through the outer reaches of the foot. Sinking yourself forwards and the crown of the head comes forwards. Release the neck, release the head. And then inhale to lift up through your Prasarita Padottanasana, A. Now we're going to come forwards again. If you feel dizzy coming into this, do come out early. Now see if you can get hold of the floor. If the floor is not available to you, you can use a brick. Anything that you have, you can make use of. There'll be a book. So you could use a brick or the floor and lengthen along the spine. So you're thinking about the tailbone and the crown of the head lengthening away from one another. With the right hand, we're going to place that down on the floor and lift into rotation. The gaze follows up towards the arm. Breathing here. Bringing that arm back down. Inhale. Reach and spiral. Try to keep the pelvis fixed.
Opening up to the other side. Lovely. Now this time, if you want to take it slightly stronger, you can see if the hand, the right side, comes to the left ankle and open up in that way, noticing how that is around the side of the body. And then funneling that left hand over to the right ankle, we come to the other side, opening up to the side body, and then bring the hands back down. We explore how it is to bring the hands to the mat, maybe sinking the crown of the head down further, rocking to the front of the feet into the toes. Maybe the crown of the head comes down to the floor for some of us. And you can play with opening the legs up further if you like. Really explore like you are an animal. We are creatures. We can explore these things. Maybe lengthening the hands away further so you come into almost like a downward dog with wide legs. Breathing under the armpits. How does that feel in your body? And then bring the hands back through center. Hands come to hip points. And then lift all the way up to standing. So wiggling the feet in now. I'm going to bring the feet in to our standing position. So we're going to come into a Kriya, which is a cleansing practice, quite an energizing cleansing practice from this position. There are 3 stages to our Kriya. I'm going to come side on so you can see what I'm doing. We do a short, fast exhalation, bend the knees, the arms come out. We're going to do that 5 times. The next stage, so you're breathing through the nose, you bring the heels off the ground. I'm going to do that 5 times. The third stage, if your knees can take it, you lift the heels off the ground, come all the way down. My knees automatically click here. Only do this if your knees are happy and your thighs will become strong, okay? And you do 5 here, you come back through level 2, which is heels off the ground, but not quite as low down, and then to your other stage, which is the heels are down, but you're bending the knees. Okay, so we'll do that together. I'll stay with the parallel because it just shows you where we're at. If it becomes a lot and the heart rate becomes very fast, just allow for things to percolate. So we're going to start with a exhale, short exhalation, inhale, exhalation, inhale. 7, 8, 9, 10. Next stage, heels off the ground. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, 7. Sorry, I've taken it to 10. 8, 9, 10. And the third level, if it works for you. 2. Exhaling. Exhaling. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Second level, heels off the ground, slightly subtler movement. 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And the first one with the heels down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Watch out for the ankles. 8, 9, 10. And stillness. Sorry, I took it into 10 by accident. Just notice how you feel. And we're going to transition now, taking our heels off the ground, bending the knees, coming into that lovely supported space as we bring the knees down to come into Nadi Shodhana, our pranayama for tonight. So coming into kneeling, if you want to bring some padding underneath the buttocks, feel free to do so. If you want to use your bolster, you can pop that underneath. So we've got this lovely space again for the pelvic tilt. Can you rock from side to side, move into that lateral extension movement? How much space is available? So we lift the arms up overhead, clasping hold of the right wrist and opening up to the side. So we've got a half banana. Breathing along that side seam. And then coming up through the midline, clasping the left wrist. Coming into another banana shape. Lovely. And then draw the arms back down again.
So with your Nadi Shodhana, if you want to move into your own pace, feel free to do so, focusing on the retentions and the pauses. That's absolutely fine. We're going to be practicing this for 5 or so minutes. So if you want to hold your elbow, we tend to do it with the right hand. We're closing with the thumb and the ring finger, our Deer Mudra. And the other fingers can go wherever they need to go. If you want to point them up to the third eye center, that's a really good contact point. Or if your fingers won't allow for it, you can curl them in towards the inside of the hand. Let's start with the left nostril, opening the left nostril, noticing if it's clear, getting hold of a tissue, doing some snorting if necessary. There was some really wonderful snorting in class yesterday with people trying to clear their noses. Inhaling and exhaling. Then we're going to come to the right side, opening, clearing, noticing whether that nostril is open. Now we're going to start with the left side connected with the moon. Inhaling, exhaling, relax the shoulders, maybe bring the forehead forwards. Inhaling, we're going to cross over, closing the nostril, exhale through the right hand side. Inhaling through the right, close and swap, exhale through the left. Inhale through the left, and exhale through the right. Coming into that lovely triangle shape. Inhaling, swapping and exhaling. Inhaling, swap and exhale. Inhale, swap, exhale. Inhale, swap and exhale. Now at the top of these inhalations, take your attention up to the third eye center. Hold your attention at the top of the third eye center, release and let go down the triangle on the left side. Inhaling. To Anjana Chakra, center of intuition, the forehead, exhale. Inhaling. Swap the fingers, exhale. Your breath will have slowed down maybe at this point. As you focus, don't feel like you need to follow my lead here. If you know what you're doing, keep going and weave the breath in between the nostrils. Remembering if you get lost that you come across to the other side to exhale, inhaling through that side, coming up and exhaling. And you begin to notice those pauses, those retentions, those still points in between the inhalation and the exhalation, which are normally so palpable in swimming, for instance, when you hold the breath, or in the Buteyko method, where you hold the breath for periods of time. This all stems with this pranayama practice developed by yoga. So you may want to take the Buteyko method into your Nadi Shodhana. If you want to play with that, the inhalation is 4, a count of 4. The retention is 7, a count of 7, at the top of the retention, at the top of the inhalation, and then there's a exhalation of 8. So if you want to play with the Buteyko method, please feel free to do so. Now, if you want to read more into the breathing practices, Breath Book by James Nestor is a really good one. Inhaling for 4, holding for 7, exhaling for 8. And that pause in yoga is called a kumbhaka, a retention. You have the Antar kumbhaka and the Bihar kumbhaka. And what you working with certain retentions in certain spaces within the breath creates certain effects within the nervous system and our states of consciousness. So when we finish our Nadi Shodhana, finish please on the left side, the side connected with the moon, the side connected with the calm. And when you're finished, release the hands down onto the thighs. With that attention up at third eye center, just noticing what has taken place and how you may feel, if indeed you feel different. Perhaps there's a sense of something around the front of the forehead, perhaps not. With that awareness along the side body, with that sense of equanimity from the hip points up to the armpits. Now How does that feel within your body? Bringing your attention to the back body, noticing the back line of the body. Does that feel like there's a sense of equanimity to the front of the body? And just notice that, how that might feel. So from this point, you can either stay with the seated position and come into meditation, either fixing the gaze softly upon one object or closing the eyes, thinking about that sense of equanimity, front body, back body, side body, or come into an inversion. When you come into inversion, when we think about our lovely rolling activities, we can come into pose of tranquility, which is that lovely balancing act, which really suits this equanimity. Now, if you're experiencing migraines or you're on your period and you don't want to come into an inversion, you can come into Viparita Karini, legs up the wall, or waterfall, bringing the bolster under the hips. Pose of tranquility is a lovely one because we're balancing the pelvis with the feet, and that is a lovely fluid space to work with. I love this to work into a stronger, more plough-like shape, to bring the feet back, to feel into that point between the shoulder blades. Now you may find that there's a sense of constriction around the front of the body. This is an opportunity to open up the back line of the body. Coming into an inversion that works for you. So if you want to come into something softer, you can come into Viparita Karini, or indeed you can carry on with a seated position for a seated meditation. It's your choice how you want to embody this sense of equanimity, of balance within your practice. And indeed, if you have come into the pose of tranquility or something similar, when you do roll out, see if you can roll out really fully utilizing that lovely length, that lovely ironing out process that takes place. And then if you haven't already done so, please do roll out of your inversion. You can stay in your Viparita Karini, of course, and come into Shavasana. Now, when we worked with Shavasana earlier on, we were looking at what takes place when you have the knees bent compared to when you lengthen straighten the legs out. And at this point in the practice, it may be the case that you really can fully release, especially around the iliopsoas and the hip flexors, coming into a lovely floppy space for Shavasana, or indeed your seated meditation position. And if you want to use a bolster underneath the knees, you create even more support so you can feel fully womb-like, nest-like, maybe bringing the feet together in a Baddha Konasana. I'm going to sit up so I can talk to you in these positions, but make yourself comfortable. Maybe you want to bring some padding to the back of the head. Maybe you're absolutely fine where you landed and there's no adjustments necessary. It does happen. Finding a space with which you can fully surrender is really key here. Where we can land into this space of equanimity without force, without second thinking ourselves. It just happens naturally. I'm going to read you a poem from Walt Whitman. You can choose to allow for my words to roll over you, or you can focus on this sense of equanimity in the body, maybe back body, front body, side body. I exist as I am, that is enough. If no other in the world be aware, I sit content. And if each and all be aware, I sit content. One world is aware, and by far the largest to me, and that is myself. And whether I come to my own today, or in 10,000 or 10 million years, I can cheerfully take it now, or with equal cheerfulness I can wait. I exist as I am, that is enough. no other in the world be aware, I sit content. And if each and all be aware, I sit content. One world is aware, and by far the largest to me, and that is myself. And whether I come to my own today or in 10,000 or 10 million years, I can cheerfully take it now, or with equal cheerfulness, I can wait. When the world pulls us this way and that way, like the winds, or the vayus in yoga, the internal winds, as well as the physical winds we experience outside, can we cultivate this space of equanimity within? A sense of support, so we don't get pulled into polarization. And perhaps in your Shavasana, you can feel the length of the side body. Does it feel equal? Perhaps it does, perhaps it doesn't. And can you just notice that without feeling like you should be doing something differently? I exist as I am, that is enough. Maybe allowing for the tongue to roll up into the upper reaches of the palate. Softening around the facial features, softness around the jaw. The softness around the crown of the head. And perhaps indeed softness around the back of the skull, around the heel of the skull, the occipital ridge. Moving into a state of softness and reciprocity. Reciprocity with the earth, sky, with all beings and non-beings around us. And like cells, can we support one another by simply just being? By existing, that is enough. Beginning to focus on the inhalation, moving some space into the fingers and the toes, wiggling the fingers and toes here in the extremities. And I invite you to roll over onto either side of your body in a fetal position at the end of the following sound, which may sound differently through the Zoom. I think with Zoom, often the vibration of the singing bowl gets cut off fairly quickly. And you may notice as you're on your side that there is not so much equanimity or quality within the side body. And at the end of the following sound, ground down through the arms and come into an easy cross-legged position that feels comfortable for you. When you find yourself in a seated position, feel into those sitting bones as they root down beneath the ground, into the floor. You may want to roll backwards and forwards to find the sitting bones. Just a realigning yourself. There's no need for this upright position to be rigid. Dropping the chin towards the breastbone. Let's bring the hands together to close the practice, create some heat, some tapas, and then bring the palms to the eye socket. Releasing around the eyes, bring the palms of the hands through the midline, past the Ajna chakra, center of intuition, down through the midline, bowing in acknowledgement of one another and space in between. Really allow for your face to bow. Namaste. I hope everyone's ankles feel okay after Mala Kriya. I'm going to close off the recording. Feel free